Hello and welcome to this edition of the Bravas Luxury Living Podcast. In this edition, we're going to go back into the world of sound. But before we do that, can I ask you to do us a favor? If you're enjoying the content from these podcasts, however you get them, please like, share. If you're on YouTube, subscribe. All of that really helps more people get access to the content and lets us know that you're enjoying it. And if you do have any questions, any ideas for shows, please just send me an email at nigel@bravas.com. So with that, let me introduce Keith. Hello, Keith. How are you today?
I'm doing fantastic, Nigel. Beautiful weather here in Dallas.
It is. Well, it's beautiful in Austin as well. So my guess is if we invite our next or this week's guest, Jason Sloan, who's the Chief Sales Officer at Sonance. Jason, I'm guessing if you're in California, the weather is beautiful too.
It is beautiful. It's in the 60s, which means we wear long sleeves.
Good. Well, you know, in Austin, 60s, and they get the furs out. Not the real furs, of course, just fake furs. Before we dig, Jason, into Sonance and the products, I think you've been at Sonance for, I think you told us 16 years. Give us a bit of your background and how you got here today.
I appreciate that. I grew up. First of all, thanks for having me. It's fun to be able to do these podcasts and connect with end users, architects, interior designers. I've been in the CI industry for the last 24 years or so. The last 16 with Sonance, the previous 8 before that at Lutron Electronics, and I'm passionate kind of about all things home technology, and believe that technology shouldn't be the 4-letter word that it often is associated with.
That's great. We're having a little bit of a problem with your picture. It's a bit jittery, but your voice is coming through clearly. So we can still see your beautiful face, but we apologize for those who are watching this on the video if you look a little bit like Max Headroom. For those that, of course, who remember who Max Headroom was. For those who don't, just ignore me. So tell us a little bit about Sonance. You guys are really now a group of companies, aren't you? And you cover such a broad range. Tell us a bit about the offering areas.
Sure. Well, Sonance started in the early 80s, 1982. When the two founders that still own the business today created the first architectural loudspeaker, and really the category of architectural loudspeakers. And I have a feeling we're going to get into what that actually means. But the Cliff Notes version of that is that speakers that get built into the walls or the ceilings of a house, of a commercial building. Over the years, the company has diversified the product offering, make a lot of different audio components, and everything really fits into one very succinct philosophy, which is that at Sonance, we try to design products to disappear. We understand that the architecture and the design of a space needs to take precedent in any environment. And so we believe our obligation as a manufacturer is to engineer and design products that will facilitate whatever the design aesthetic of the homeowner or of that design team ultimately want. Again, over the years, our portfolio has expanded. We have several brands within the overall umbrella. Obviously, Sonance is the longest standing and largest brand. We have iPort, which is a product line that is designed to hold, charge, and protect iPads in a residential or commercial environment. We have a brand called TrueFig, which is a way to flush mount architectural devices, things like receptacles, keypads, light switches, HVAC registers, returns, that sort of thing. And then the most recent addition is James Loudspeaker, which is a company that Sonance acquired in January of 2020. And that's a company that is a U.S.-based manufacturer in Minden, Nevada, right outside of South Lake Tahoe. And the whole reason that the company exists is to offer a wide variety of portfolio of products that are designed to disappear, but also do kind of the next level of that, which is if you run into any situations where a product doesn't quite fit, what James Loudspeaker really has excelled at for the 20 years for the company is adapting the products or customizing the products in their portfolio to match any construction environment, whether it's inside the house, outside of the house, harsh marine environments on super yachts, and really is the leading supplier of products that need to be customized and bespoke options throughout the world.
So you talked about what I think is probably the most important thing with speakers now, which is how they're designed, how they look. How much would you say that's changed in the last few years as compared to how they sound?
It's interesting that when speakers moved from the bookshelf or the floor into the wall or to the ceiling, that was a pretty big advancement. And then from there, it was how do you get the maximum amount of performance out of them? And that aesthetic kind of stayed the same from 1982 to basically 2006. And that's when the founders of the business said, I think we can do a better job aesthetically, making sure our products can be designed to disappear. And we introduced a wide variety of solutions. There's so many options today, from completely invisible speakers that rival or exceed the performance of speakers that you can see, to completely flush-mounted speakers that will match the architectural light fixtures in a project, that have a tiny little opening, whether it's round or square, different sizes, different shapes, or speakers that have a really thin bezel on them that are really designed to accommodate a wide variety of budgets and price points of projects that can be custom painted to match their environment.
I think that thin bezel was the first real big step forward. We do a lot of remodels where clients are going in and saying, well, I've got all these old speakers. Do I have to replace them? And the truth is they probably sound just fine, but they're starting to yellow with age, and that big plastic bezel just looks really dated. But that was kind of where we found that conversation about the speaker, if we were starting with maybe a Sonance speaker or a similar brand, they all sounded good. The real driving factor for the decision was the aesthetics, and it looks like you guys kind of agree with that.
Yeah, it's a guiding principle for our company. We believe that if you're going to pay $500 for a pair of speakers that you're going to build into the wall or the ceiling, you should expect them to sound fantastic. And that expectation grows as the price point grows. What you should also expect is to have options in terms of how they look. And so our number one question that we ask homeowners and we ask interior designers and architects is, how do you want your sound to look? And the answer to that is simply it should look like it belongs within the design or the architecture of the space. That's the right starting point for a conversation about audio.
I want to go back one bit. I think we'll talk more about the aesthetics in a minute. I want to go back because Keith's ears, I think, are much better than mine. So, and what I get asked quite often is the difference between cheap architectural speakers and good architectural speakers. What should I be listening for? What is the sound difference to you, at least, that someone should be able to tell whether they're getting good or bad?
Sure. Well, I think there's a lot of things that go into the quality of audio, right? And I think everybody's had an experience where you're somewhere, whether it's a restaurant, hopefully not your house, maybe somebody else's house, where you're listening to music and it's just harsh, it's fatiguing, and you get tired listening to it. That's really a fidelity conversation, right? How good a quality of a speaker is what kind of fidelity is that speaker capable of reproducing? So you have that segment of the conversation, but you also have coverage, which is how well are speakers deployed throughout a space. Our belief is that when you get even balanced coverage of audio and the fidelity is at an acceptable quality, the end result of that is audio that you want to have on more often than it's off, and something that provides smooth, even balanced coverage throughout an entire area. It's just a wonderfully enjoyable experience to that end. We always feel like the most important conversation, if you're a homeowner considering putting audio in your house, is to interview the company that's going to be doing it. And I think Bravas is a great example of a company that does a wonderful job paying attention to details, ask the questions that homeowner might not even know that they need to ask to get them to a point where, one, the product is going to blend in beautifully to the design, and from a fidelity and from a coverage standpoint, it's going to exceed everyone's expectations.
Does it matter what you listen to? I mean, if you're a classical music, if you're listening to, the 80s channel on Sirius XM versus, heavy rock or rap, does that make any difference to the speakers you pick?
It's a combination of a lot of different things, and speakers are the end point of that conversation, right? So you have what are you feeding that speaker with, which I think ultimately, Nigel, is your question. And there's a lot of different options out there today, and you can get wonderfully recorded versions of any type of music. We're fortunately in a spot where there's high resolution streaming available, and so you can listen to a classical, you can listen to Bach that's recorded at a very, very low quality level and a very, very high quality level, and tell demonstrable difference in those two recordings. And so it has a lot to do with what is the streaming rate that's available, right? How is that music recorded, and how do you get it to a quality product that is capable of reproducing that in the way that ultimately the artist intended, because that's really what we're trying to capture, which is this experience that is in line with how the music was recorded, and it fills you and hopefully your house with a lot of emotion. And it shouldn't matter whether it's rap or 80s or classical or jazz. Those are personal preferences. At the end of the day, it should all sound good, and a high quality provider, somebody like Bravas, can help guide you through the decision points to ensure that every part of the system is in line with reproducing the music in the way that you're going to enjoy it the most.
Yeah, Nigel, my feedback on that would be it almost depends more on how you're going to listen in the space where those speakers are. For example, in my previous house, I had Sonance's entry-level 8-inch speaker in my master bathroom because I only used it when I was in the shower. I could have bought the most expensive speaker in the world, but in the end, I'm not really going to hear it that well inside my shower. Whereas in my kitchen, where we spend most of our time, we have a much higher-end speaker with a DSP amplifier, which I'd love Jason to talk a little bit more about, not just Sonance's DSP, but just how amplification affects the speakers. But it really, for us, just depends on how do you use the space, and when you're in it, how carefully are you going to be listening. For example, a hallway, I'm probably not going to put the most expensive speaker in, but I'd love to have one there so if someone's walk around the house, they get that experience. But just if you don't mind answering just kind of the amplification question in general, how you think about that.
Yeah, the question that comes our direction the most often from homeowners is, hey, what kind of wireless speakers are in your portfolio, and what are the options that are available today? And here's the reality, is that there's a ton of different options that are out there. There's nothing that's truly wireless, right? You have to have some sort of power to it, whether it's a battery-powered speaker or whatnot. And so there's always a power source that you're connecting it to. And so whatever device you're using to stream audio into the house, that gets connected to a power amplifier. And what that amplifier does is it takes that signal and it basically amplifies it, as the name implies, and it sends it to the speaker. That amplification has changed pretty dramatically over the last 10, 15 years. It's very commonplace for amplifiers to have something called digital signal processing included in them today. And what that means in English is that you're able to manipulate the signal to compensate for one of a variety of different things. Meaning that, let's say you have a room that's all glass and marble. That's a really reflective space. And if you went in and you didn't have any furnishings in it, you just started talking, you'd get a headache pretty quickly, because you would hear not only your voice, but you'd hear the echo of your voice. And I think we've all had that experience. What digital signal processing can do is it can help tampen down that effect, and it can manipulate the audio signal going to the speakers to compensate from, we would in the business call that a very live room environment. Or if you have a room that is, let's just say, all fabric on the walls and big heavy carpet and big bulky furniture, that's a really dead room, meaning that room absorbs acoustic energy. And so we have different signals or curves that we would apply within the amplifier to compensate, to allow that music to sound the best it possibly can in that environment.
So talk about subwoofers here. So, I've had conversations, we've talked on this podcast before about, when is enough subwoofer enough, when, how much bass? How do you guys place that in your storyline?
It's never enough. You can always use a little more.
I think everybody would answer that question in a very similar capacity, Keith. But the one thing that we find is, particularly outside, is there's never enough bass. And bass translates to warmth in music. And simply, when you add a subwoofer, you're getting warmth. So where you really see it the best, there's two extremes. When the music's played quietly, and you can still have that warmth of the music. You can feel the music a little bit. Or if you're having a party and you want the speakers to carry that party and you turn it up, you can hear that thump and that kind of chest pump, which is what people traditionally associate with subwoofers. You know, people are, I think, accustomed, and they get having a subwoofer in a home theater environment. What people are still learning is that the subwoofer can provide a ton of benefit in an audio system as well. And it's really at those two extreme opposite sides of the listening spectrum.
Okay, so you brought up the subject of outdoor, so let's jump there. You know, everybody has these little portable speakers. They range from $50 to hundreds and hundreds of dollars. Why, for some, at a very basic, let's start at the very basic level. Why, for somebody, would you say, that's great, but let me explain what you're missing? What are they missing?
Yeah, so we'll start with the conversation outside, and then I think that there's some parallels we can certainly talk inside, because that's a conversation I have with my friends and my neighbors. Honestly, they're like, hey, in my kitchen, in my outside at the patio table, I'm fine with this tiny little speaker, and it's wireless, and it's great. And the reality is if you're expecting a speaker of any type, just one singular speaker, to be able to give you enough output to cover the wide variety of uses that you're going to have in, let's say, your backyard, that's exceeding the expectations of what that product can produce. Because when you're right next to that product, it might be loud enough for the conversation. But as soon as you step outside of right next to that speaker, you have to turn it up and able to hear it. What that does is it makes that area right around the speaker really just unusable. You can't sit there because the music's simply too loud. And if you're on the opposite side of the backyard, you're having to blast that speaker, and it might not still be loud enough. The outdoor environment in particular is one that really benefits for something, which is when you have speakers, you want to place them around the perimeter of the property and focus that energy in back towards the property. The reason it's counterintuitive is because you want to use more smaller speakers. What that allows you to do is run the music at a lower volume level, so you don't have to crank it to hear it, and still give you smooth, balanced, even coverage throughout the entire space. What we find is that's much more conducive to how people want to use their space outside of the house.
I also wonder that our experience, at least my experience until recently, of outdoor speakers were hideous things that were very tinny. I mean, the technology has really changed dramatically recently, hasn't it?
Without a doubt. I mean, I think the traditional thought, if you think speakers outside the house, you think these boxes that look a variety of different shades of good that are mounted to the house. Really, from a Sonance perspective, we believe that your speakers should be designed to disappear, right? So what that means is we want to put speakers out in the garden, pointed back at the house, and then we accompany those with buried subwoofers. The whole point is you want the experience of the music without actually having to physically look at the thing itself. And then, Nigel, you mentioned tinny. I mean, that has everything to do with the quality or the fidelity output of the speaker. And you're 100% right. That the capabilities, particularly outside the house with more durable materials, have come such a long way in the last 15, 20 years.
When we're talking about the quality of outdoor audio, it's amazing to me that 5 years ago we were doing 35 to 50 watts to a pair of speakers, and now we're running something like 750 watts to 8 or more speakers outdoors. And it's not because people are listening louder. I think that is the biggest misconception, is more speakers is only valuable to me if I'm listening louder. And I think you did a great job of describing it, is just getting that blanket of sound so that everybody in the yard is getting the right amount of audio without ever having to really crank it up. Do you find that most people are still doing zoned systems in the yard? So maybe speakers on the patio, speakers around the pool, speakers out by the barbecue that they can use separately? Or have you seen them just kind of replacing them with a single landscape system?
Keith, I think that's a good question. We see a lot of different things. As this concept of speakers scattered throughout the perimeter of the property, focused back into the interior, has really been meaningful for homeowners. They're finding different ways they want to emphasize different areas. I have a lot of people that I have little kids. My kids are 8 and 10, and so our friends, when they ask, how do you explain audio outside the house? I think the goal has always been, when you go to Disneyland, you hear the same music everywhere, and it's not off-putting because it's at a low volume level. Except you hear it. Now, it might be the same song over and over and over and over again, and we can correct that, right, by varying the content. But I think that from a baseline standpoint, that's what people are looking for. And then what we're starting to see is people want to supplement kind of that base layer of smooth, balanced, even coverage with areas that can perform at a higher volume level. So, you want to have that dance floor effect, and you might not want to have that everywhere. You want to have it a specific part of your backyard. We can augment that idea with speakers that are specifically designed to give you ultra high output and that low kind of thundering bass that would really what you would typically associate with a dance floor.
Yeah. I like that analogy of the Disneyland. I would call it the Four Seasons or the spa. Like if you went to a place like that, you would expect that background audio. You might not even notice it's there until it's not. But there are so many ways that our clients are bringing that resort type experience to their homes. And this just seems like one of the most obvious examples of a way to do that.
There's an analogy that we find works really well to explain music. And it's not because people don't understand how speakers work. It's they just don't ever think about it. And the analogy I use the most often is lights, right? You take a lamp. A lamp is going to give you good kind of localized lighting, and it's going to give you some ambiance. A singular speaker that you plug into the wall can do that, no problem, right? But when you're talking about lighting for an entire area, you usually are going to go with architectural lighting or lights that are in the ceiling. And the reason you're going to do that is because it gives you smooth, balanced coverage of lighting. Audio works exactly the same way as light fixtures. And so that's the easiest way to think about, how should I approach my thought process for this given project from an audio standpoint? Well, what are you doing for lighting? And let's mirror that same philosophy from an audio standpoint. And the end result is going to be something that you're really happy with, giving you that smooth, balanced effect that you're ultimately going for.
Okay, so if I think about that example, you actually bring up another question I always can't get my brain quite around. If I put two lights and, the beams cross over, the light typically tends to merge because I'm not using a red light and a green light. And so, the light merges. If I have outdoor speakers and indoor speakers playing the same music, is there a problem of the sound overlapping? And if there is, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, there's not really a problem. I mean, the more speakers you have in a given space, the more critical it is to have an expert like the Bravas suite of companies involved, because they're really the company that will deploy those in the correct fashion. You can send every single speaker the exact same signal. That's called running something in mono. What traditionally people associate with speakers is two speakers. So you have a left speaker and a right speaker. And the whole goal there is that you are applying individual information to each channel, and the net effect of that is a stereo image of whatever music you're listening to. The more speakers you have, there's some tricks in terms of how you install those and how you set them up to extract the best possible performance in, let's say, a big open style room, whether it's inside or out.
So before we go, I want to talk about a couple of other things. One is about some of the trends. As you think about technology and sound and speakers going forward, what's coming? You don't have to give us the product names and stuff, but in terms of the technologies, what's coming that makes you excited?
I think the most significant advancement from an audio standpoint is that you can pay $500 from a variety of different companies, and honestly, all 5 of those are going to sound really good. Some of them will sound better than others. We're biased. We think we sound among the best out there. But really, the conversation, as Keith mentioned earlier, it starts with the aesthetic options that are available, and from there, it migrates into fidelity and performance at some point. The thing that has got me the most excited is that the technology has finally progressed that gives invisible loudspeakers. These are speakers that physically become part of the wall or the ceiling. They kind of look like drywall. They can keep up with, if not offer you better fidelity and performance than normal visible speakers that you would build into the wall or ceiling. And that is so freeing and fundamentally important for designers and architects and design focused companies that deploy technology, because the reality is that technology itself is cool and there are technology enthusiasts, but it's the benefit of that technology that most people respond to, right? It's never, boy, I look up in my ceiling and I see a giant speaker and I'm really happy with it. It's, wow, the effect of that speaker is awesome, and I can play it at a low volume level and I can still hear the full spectrum of the audio, and there's good warmth. And try doing that in a room that doesn't have any speakers and have a collective group of potential homeowners or architects and designers in it. And that's that blank canvas that we've always wanted, that frees the potential project from the handcuffs of saying, no, I've got to ensure this speaker is placed in the right location. I have design flexibility. I don't have to see it now. And by the way, the performance is going to blow your mind.
Yeah, that value proposition has changed so much. Most clients that you would talk to, going from one series of 6-inch speaker to the next series up to the next series up, it was really hard to explain that value proposition to somebody that didn't think they cared that much about how the music sounded. But now with like the James Small apertures that you have, it's amazing that we can offer them something that looks infinitely better and also happens to sound significantly better all in one package. And I think that is the kind of value that we weren't able to show clients beforehand. And as you mentioned, Invisibles, in the past, Invisibles were really great looking and you couldn't see them, but the sound was mediocre at best. And what we've heard recently from you guys is just mind blowing. Not to put too fine a point on it, but it's really changing the way we consider speccing those speakers now.
It's pretty fun. Again, that technology has come a long way, and we're fortunate. We've got a extraordinarily talented speaker designer on staff that had to invent ways to test what would become our new invisible loudspeakers. And so the end result of that is something that you listen to, and it's hard to process the fact that it's completely invisible because it sounds so incredibly good. And Keith, to your point, I mean, fidelity or quality of sound was always that compromise on the invisible side of the equation, meaning that you want the invisibles because you can't see them, but you're like, there's this thing that will always hold me back because I can't play a particular type of music. They're not great at producing surround sound. Those handcuffs have been completely taken off, and what's possible now is going to be a lot of fun to see how it plays out over the next few years.
Jason, one of the other products you mentioned in your description about Sonance, I think is a product lots of people don't know about. It's really not got anything to do with speakers, but it's just such an interesting product when you see it. We were doing some filming last week in a really an amazing house, and every one of the iPads that was controlling the rooms sat on an iPort device. And I don't know why everybody doesn't have these in the house. Well, we've got you. Tell us a little bit more about that and how you see people's using that equipment.
Thank you for the comments. We couldn't agree more. Obviously, we're a little biased in that regard. People used to, 10, 15 years ago, when you went to control multiple things in your house, you had to go to a dedicated spot in the house and you had this touchscreen, and it required a decent amount of programming to get that to the point where you knew as a homeowner how to access all of the different things in your house and to make it easy for you. Apple changed the game when they came out with the iPhone. The iPod Touch was the first iteration, right? And like that idea, people quickly learned how to use touchscreens in a really meaningful capacity. So as the iPad was coming out, our company said, well, what we really do is design ways to integrate that into architecture that looks seamless, looks intentional, right? And that gives architects and interior designers the ability to incorporate it into the design. And so really what iPort, again, it stands to hold, charge, and protect iPads. And whether that's a fixed mount on the wall that gives you kind of that dedicated spot you know is not going to get up and walk around, that you always have a control point for your house. If you want to look at the cameras or turn on the music or adjust your lighting or whatnot. Or we also make solutions that wrap around an iPad in a really beautiful I'll use a word, Nigel, you're familiar with, aluminum case that protects the iPad and architecturally looks like a fine detail in the home. Too often technology companies, manufacturers kind of like us, we're guilty of saying, look at the thing, it's beautiful by itself. And you can't think of products in that regard as a manufacturer. You have to think contextually where they're going to be placed. And the more refined the space, the more refined your product needs to be in order to make it sure that it looks consistent with the rest of the design.
Yeah, I know our clients, anyone who has a home automation system that has like an iPad type interface, somewhere in the house you need one of these things. It's an amazing device.
They are so interesting to use. And we found it's not really a zero-sum game between the touch panel and the iPort. We have a lot of jobs where there will be a dedicated touch panel for the automation system in the kitchen, but in another spot in the kitchen, like maybe near the breakfast nook, there's that iPort. And that's what whoever's cooking might grab to see a recipe. You just hand it to the kids to keep them entertained, to keep them from grabbing the cookies or whatever it is. And both of those products have worked so well together. We originally thought of it as just a replacement for a touch panel. But now it's hard to imagine our jobs not having both available to clients.
Absolutely. For the record, this is not an endorsement that iPort stops your kids from eating cookies.
Okay, well, we'll see. We'll do a vote afterwards and see whether iPort encourage cookie eating. Luke and Jason, great to have you on. Great content. Before we let our guests go, we make them play our little 3-question game. So I'm going to ask you those 3 questions. First of all, what is the one piece of home automation technology or gadget or tool that you think you could not live without?
It sounds self-serving, but a music system. Music has become such an important and integral part of my family's life. We have music on all day, every day until we go to sleep at my house.
Okay, I think that's great. Okay, so I'm sure in your years with Sonance, you've seen some amazing jobs, some amazing homes. Is there one that when someone says to you, what's the most incredible job you guys ever did? Is there one that springs to mind?
We are fortunate that we're in this industry with wonderful and ridiculous and over-the-top and highly refined and luxurious spaces. And every project has kind of one thing that you're like, you never believe it. They put a 107-inch television under the floor of the bathroom. Why would you do that? Because it's fun and you can. But there was one project in Bel Air. It's not complete yet. It's getting a lot of press. It's called The One. It's 108,000 square feet. It has every single, this is like crazy. I never thought I'd see that again. Of all the projects I've ever been to, wrapped up into one massive compound. And I think that the goal is to put it on the market for $500 million. And, as a small customer base that can afford that, but for the customer that picks that house, boy, they're going to get over the top everything.
Okay, stupid question. What's the most number of speakers you think you ever put in a house?
I can tell you outdoor definitively. We did an outdoor project overseas that had 667 satellite speakers and 134 subwoofers in it, and then an appropriate amount of amplification. That was a massive property, multiple acres, had a vineyard, and those grapes had the good fortune of listening to wonderful music.
Well, that's great. Okay, last question. Is there a piece of technology, a gadget, a device that hasn't been invented that you thought, well, if I could have this, my life would be complete?
I think that my answer is not really hardware. It's more software. And manufacturers that do software have come a long way in terms of making things easier to access. And this idea that once you have whatever you have in your house, Bravas comes in and deploys that for you. But the software that enables that not only to be easy to use, but to initiate change at the homeowner level, that's pretty exciting. And it's clearly the direction that any of the companies that you might use, whether it's Crestron, Savant, Control4, a company like Lutron Electronics, or others, right? They're all starting to give that capability. And as a homeowner, that's pretty cool because you can feel emboldened that you can deploy things that you have control over in the future. And I think that just the more of that can happen, the more excited that I am to deploy different things in my own house.
Great. Well, listen. Thank you very much, Jason. We love the products. We love putting it in our customers' homes, and we're grateful. And thank you for joining us,
gentlemen. It was a ton of fun. Thanks a bunch, Keith, Nigel. Good talking with you.
Thanks.
And thanks for your time.